What if the one threat holding the entire global economy hostage just vanished quietly, and almost nobody outside a small group of officials even noticed? Somewhere beneath the surface of one of the busiest waterways on Earth, a weapon that took months to plant was wiped out in a matter of weeks, and the story barely made the news. Before we go any further, hit that like button right now, because this is the kind of story that deserves more than a passing glance. Subscribe if you want to actually understand what's happening in the world instead of just scrolling past it, and share this with someone who still thinks oil markets and military strategy are boring topics. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll see why they're not. Let's start with the geography, because none of this makes sense until you understand exactly where we're talking about. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran on one side and Oman, and the United Arab Emirates on the other. At its narrowest point, it's only about... Here's what makes this particular choke point so uniquely dangerous. There's no backup plan. You cannot build a pipeline large enough or fast enough to replace what flows through this strait. You cannot simply reroute tankers around the entire continent of Africa without adding weeks to every single voyage and driving costs through the roof. This narrow stretch of water is, quite literally, the door the global economy walks through every day. And for decades, Iran has understood something important. Just by sitting next to that door, they hold a kind of power that has nothing to do with the size of their economy or the strength of their military compared to the countries around them. Threaten to close that door, and you don't need a massive army. You just need enough uncertainty to make the whole world nervous. That leverage has always rested on one specific weapon: sea mines. Now, when most people hear that word, they think of something old-fashioned, something rusty and spiked, straight out of a black-and-white war film. Forget that picture entirely. Modern naval mines are sophisticated, quiet, and almost eerily intelligent. Some are contact mines, which explode the moment a ship's hull physically touches them. But the more advanced versions, called influence mines, don't need contact at all. They sit on the seafloor or hover just above it, and they wait. They listen for the magnetic signature of a passing hull. They pick up the specific acoustic vibration created by a ship's propeller. They can even sense the pressure wave pushed out by a massive tanker displacing thousands of tons of water above it. When the right combination of signals matches what they've been programmed to detect, they detonate on their own. Nobody has to trigger them manually. They find their target automatically. And here's the nightmare that creates for any navy trying to keep a shipping lane safe. You don't know exactly where these mines are unless you search for them meticulously, meter by meter, across a seafloor that is often muddy, murky, and cluttered with natural debris that can easily be mistaken for a mine on sonar. It is slow, it is dangerous, and it is exactly the kind of uncertainty that turns a handful of hidden weapons into a weapon capable of freezing global trade in its tracks. During the height of recent tensions, Iranian forces used small, fast boats to quietly place mines throughout the strait. These boats are hard to detect from the air and even harder to track at night, slipping in and out of busy shipping lanes without drawing attention. By the time the situation had escalated fully, reports suggested more than 100 of these objects were sitting somewhere in that waterway, waiting to be located and dealt with before a single tanker could pass through with any real confidence. Here's the part of this story that is almost too strange to believe. Iran lost track of where they had placed them. Stop and think about that for a second. This is a regime that planted weapons throughout the most economically important waterway on the planet, weapons specifically designed to hold global oil supply hostage for political leverage, and yet they could not even maintain an accurate record of their own placements. It's the equivalent of burying treasure in your own backyard and then losing the map to your own hiding spots. Except in this case, the treasure explodes underneath ships carrying 200,000 tons of crude oil. Earlier this year, an agreement known as the Islamabad Memorandum was signed, in which Iran formally committed to removing the very mines they had placed. And then, according to officials who spoke to major news outlets, they simply couldn't follow through. Not out of stubbornness, but because they lacked the technology, the resources, and the internal coordination needed to locate and safely remove what they had scattered across the seafloor. That single fact tells you almost everything you need to know about the level of competence behind this entire operation. So the United States Navy stepped in, and what happened next represents one of the more remarkable displays of modern military capability in recent memory. 3 separate layers of technology worked together seamlessly, from the sky, across the surface, and deep beneath the water, and at no point did a single human diver have to enter that dangerous minefield. Let's start from the top and work our way down. In the air, specialized helicopters flew low, steady grid patterns above the water, equipped with a laser detection system unlike anything used in previous decades. Instead of a single continuous beam, the system fires rapid pulses of laser light down into the water and reads the returning signal to build a complete 3-dimensional picture of everything beneath the surface, from floating, except every bit of it is real. Unmanned surface vessels, essentially robot boats, move through the water carrying different equipment depending on the mission. Some towed high-resolution sonar systems capable of scanning the seafloor and the water column simultaneously in a single pass, detecting mines buried in the mud as well as ones floating higher up. These vessels don't get tired. They don't need brakes. They can repeat the exact same search pattern with mechanical precision for as long as necessary. But one particular tool stood out for its sheer cleverness. Certain robot boats towed a system that drags a magnetic cable while simultaneously generating specific acoustic frequencies. Together, this creates a convincing fake signature, the electronic ghost of a massive warship that isn't actually there. To an influence mine listening for exactly this kind of pattern, it looks completely real. So the mine detonates, wasting itself on an empty patch of open water where no ship, no crew, and no real target ever existed. The mine is destroyed and nobody gets hurt. It's essentially tricking a weapon into blowing itself up, chasing a shadow, using the mine's own intelligence against it. Then comes the third layer, and honestly, this is the part that should genuinely give you chills. Deep beneath the surface, roughly 90 feet down, an underwater drone shaped like a small torpedo moved slowly and methodically along the sea floor, running detailed sonar scans just a couple of meters above the mud. It was searching for shapes that didn't quite belong, objects that resembled ordinary rocks but were just slightly too round, too symmetrical, too deliberately placed. Because that's exactly where the most advanced mines end up. Not floating where a helicopter could spot them easily, but half buried in sediment, patient and hidden, sometimes for months at a time. The drone found them anyway, tracing careful, methodical lines across terrain it couldn't see with its own eyes, trusting only the sonar data building in front of it. It mapped every object, marked the precise coordinates, and passed that information along, so each one could be safely dealt with. By combining these three layers, the sky, the surface, and the seafloor, the Navy located more than 100 of these dangerous objects scattered throughout the strait. And through the entire operation, not one American diver had to swim near a live mine. That detail alone marks a genuine turning point. For decades, mine clearance meant putting human lives directly at risk. This operation proved that story no longer has to be true. There's important historical context here that makes this achievement even more impressive. For years, mine clearance relied on ships specifically built from wood and fiberglass instead of metal. Precisely so, their hulls wouldn't trigger the magnetic mines waiting beneath them. Their crews carried a nickname that captures exactly how dangerous the job was, calling themselves mission-demanded raw courage paired with painstaking patience. Sailing slowly through a minefield, hunting each weapon individually, knowing that a single mistake could be fatal, was simply part of the job description. Those older ships have since been retired, along with a specialized helicopter that used to handle this kind of mission exclusively. In their place now stands this new system of drones and robots, tested for real in an actual minefield inside one of the most strategically vital waterways in the world, not in a simulation or a training exercise. And it worked. The old tools, built on human bravery and painstaking patience, have been replaced by machines that feel no fear and require no rest. Now, let's pause for a moment before going further. If understanding how the world actually works matters to you, ring the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next, and drop a comment telling me one thing from this video you didn't know before today. All right, let's keep going. Here's why this matters more than most people realize. Iran's entire strategy in this conflict rested on a single, simple threat. Push us too far, and we close Hormuz. We mine the strait. We hold the global economy hostage until the pain becomes unbearable for everyone else. This threat worked as a deterrent for decades. Not because Iran necessarily wanted to follow through, but because everyone understood how expensive and dangerous it would be to clear a minefield in contested waters. Iran never actually needed the mines to sink a single ship. They only needed the world to believe those mines were out there, somewhere, unpredictable and uncertain. That uncertainty alone was enough to slow tankers, spike oil prices, and trigger urgent phone calls between world leaders thousands of miles away. That is precisely the threat the United States just dismantled, methodically, publicly, using technology that Iran has no realistic way of matching. The political weapon hiding behind those mines has been taken apart piece by piece, and Iran knows it. Following the operation, an official announcement confirmed that mines throughout the international waters of the Strait had been removed or safely destroyed. But there was another part of that announcement that mattered just as much, if not more. Iran was formally warned that any vessel caught placing new mines in that waterway would be destroyed immediately. On top of that, satellite surveillance is now monitoring that stretch of water around the clock, with no gaps and no blind spots. Sit with that for a second, because this isn't just a statement describing what already happened. It's a warning about what happens the next time someone tries. It's a boundary drawn using satellites, aircraft, and constant monitoring, and the message could not be clearer. There is zero tolerance now for mining that strait. attempted, and the vessel responsible will be located and destroyed almost immediately, not after weeks of diplomatic negotiations or a slow-moving international resolution. That is the new reality, and it's backed by a demonstrated ability to follow through, because the very operation that cleared the mines also proved the surveillance and response system genuinely works. Some critics have pointed out that the Navy only cleared the actual shipping lanes rather than sweeping the entire strait from coast to coast. That's technically accurate, but it misses the point entirely. Inside the strait, there's a specific traffic pattern. One lane for inbound ships, one for outbound, each roughly 2 miles wide, separated by a buffer zone. That narrow strip is where actual tanker traffic moves. A fully loaded oil tanker carrying 200,000 tons of crude cannot swerve at the last second if it spots something suspicious in the water. It needs miles just to slow down. So the mission was never about scrubbing every inch of seafloor across the entire strait. It was about guaranteeing that specific corridor the actual route ships use was completely safe. And that corridor is now clear. Mines sitting closer to Iran's own coastline, in waters no responsible tanker captain would ever sail through anyway, simply aren't part of the real operational picture. Now let's talk about what's happening inside Iran itself, because the economic dimension of this story deserves just as much attention as the military side. Iran's currency has been in a genuine free fall. At one recent point, it took over 2 million units of their currency just to purchase a single American dollar. Compare that to earlier this year, when the exchange rate sat at roughly a quarter of that figure. In just a few months, the currency lost approximately 75% of its value. That's not a currency under mild pressure. That's an economy being hollowed out in real time, month after month, in plain view of the entire world. And the cracks are starting to show. Footage circulating online shows people in Iranian cities speaking more openly than they would have dared even a year ago. The government's tight grip on the information environment inside the country is loosening, one video at a time. The economic pain is landing hardest on ordinary families, not on military commanders who have their own financial networks shielding them from the worst of it, but on shopkeepers, teachers, engineers, and parents simply trying to buy groceries and pay rent with a currency losing value by the week. That pressure doesn't fade, it compounds. And a government that cannot stabilize its economy, cannot demonstrate genuine military strength, and cannot even keep track of the weapons it planted in its own neighboring waters, is quickly running out of convincing stories to tell its own people. One senior Iranian security official recently appeared on state television and promised what he called a seismic response to American economic pressure, insisting that not a single drop of oil would leave the region. Meanwhile, millions of barrels continued moving through that exact Strait every single day while he spoke. There's always a gap between what gets said for domestic audiences and what's actually happening on the ground. But that gap is becoming increasingly difficult to hide, especially when ordinary citizens are watching their savings evaporate, while tankers keep sailing past exactly as they always have. So what does Iran actually have left? It's worth being honest here rather than dismissing them entirely, because underestimating a cornered opponent is always a risky move. They still have fast attack boats built around swarming tactics, using large numbers of small, heavily armed vessels to try to overwhelm bigger ships in confined waters. They still maintain connections to armed groups across the region, capable of stirring up trouble without Iran having to act directly. They still possess a missile arsenal that, while significantly weakened by recent strikes, hasn't disappeared entirely. And they still have the human factor, the very real possibility that a regime backed into a corner decides that doing something reckless feels safer than doing nothing at all. History offers plenty of examples of exactly that kind of desperate decision-making. Before we continue, if this kind of clear, honest breakdown is exactly why you keep coming back to videos like this, go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because we're heading into the part of this story most coverage completely overlooked, which is exactly why the right response here isn't celebration. It's steady, quiet vigilance. Keep the surveillance running nonstop. Keep aircraft on standby. Keep watching every vessel that leaves an Iranian port the moment it moves. Because a threat doesn't disappear simply because a press release goes out. It disappears when every possible path toward aggression is being watched, tracked, and ready to be answered instantly. That's exactly the kind of network being built across the region right now. Not an army of occupation, but a web of constant observation designed to make aggression too costly to even attempt. The goal isn't punishing Iran after the fact. It's making the entire idea of trying something reckless feel pointless before it ever begins. And here's the bigger picture worth sitting with. What just happened in that strait wasn't only about Iran. It was the first large-scale, real-world proof that a fully unmanned system for clearing mines actually works under genuine, high-stakes conditions. Not a controlled test. Not a demonstration staged for cameras. A real minefield inside a real strategic choke point with real tankers waiting to pass through and real economic consequences riding on the outcome. And it worked exactly as intended. Think about what that means going forward. The hardest part of mine warfare has always been the human cost. Divers swimming near live explosives, crews spending weeks sailing painfully slow patterns through waters that could kill them without warning. That risk has always limited how quickly a Navy could respond and how much operational danger commanders were willing to accept. Remove the human element from that equation, and the entire calculation shifts. Machines don't get exhausted. They don't feel fear. They don't need to be pulled out after hours underwater. You can run search patterns continuously, swapping batteries and pushing forward without ever putting a single person in harm's way. That means faster results, dramatically lower risk, and an entirely different political calculation. If clearing a minefield no longer requires sending sailors into danger, the political cost of attempting it drops significantly. And that means the entire deterrent value of planting mines drops right along with it. Every other Navy watching this operation, and there are plenty watching closely, just learned the same lesson Iran is now learning the hard way. The era of using cheap sea mines as leverage against a technologically superior opponent is closing fast, and it may never fully reopen. So where does all of this leave things? Iran entered this conflict holding what it believed was its most powerful card, the ability to threaten the world's oil supply by holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage. That card is gone now, not because of a massive bombing campaign, not because of political collapse, but because a combination of aerial lasers, robotic boats, and underwater drones methodically dismantled the threat faster and more thoroughly than anyone in Tehran expected, and then backed it up with a credible promise that any attempt to repeat it would be answered immediately. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil still flows through that narrow stretch of water every single day, and what just happened there sent an unmistakable message about whose terms that oil flows under going forward. This isn't a story that quietly fades after one headline. It represents a genuine shift in how this entire region operates from here on out, enforced by systems that never sleep, never blink, and never need to rest. The real question now is what comes next. Does Iran attempt to rebuild this threat in some other form? Do their fast attack boats start pushing harder in contested waters? Does pressure shift toward proxy groups elsewhere in the region to create a different kind of disruption? These are the remaining moves available to a government that just watched its most powerful piece of leverage disappear entirely, with no clear path to getting it back. If you want to keep following exactly how this unfolds, this is the channel to stay tuned to. Smash that subscribe button, drop a comment with your prediction for Iran's next move, and share this with someone who needs the full picture instead of just another scrolling headline. The story is far from finished, and I'll be right here breaking down every next development as it happens.